Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Pragmatism Network's webinar series. I'm Dr. Takaharu Oda, the Representative Director of APN. This is the third installment in our 2025 series. First, about the APN, Asian Pragmatism Network. We are a new international academic association. Our mission is to develop pragmatism studies in an Asian context. As we know, pragmatism was born in America, but it has long since become global. Asia is one of the areas where it is expanding. At APN, we work to encourage and cultivate this development of pragmatism in Asia. We work with pragmatism scholars and students who are physically resident in Asia. We also work with scholars from all over the world to connect pragmatist philosophy with Asian studies. Our webinar series is our first active program. We welcome everyone who is committed to pragmatism in Asia. Please visit our website at www.asianpragmatism.org. And now, our Executive Director, Jason Lacey, will introduce our presenter, Dr. Johnathan Flowers.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So a bit about our guest for today, our host, our presenter for today, Dr. Johnathan Flowers. He's assistant professor of philosophy at California State University, Northridge. His research areas include African American intellectual history, Japanese aesthetics, American pragmatism, philosophy of disability, and philosophy of technology. He also works in the areas of science, technology studies, and comic studies, where he applies insights from American pragmatism, philosophy of race, and philosophy of disability to current issues in human-computer interaction, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and representations of identity in popular culture. His first monograph, and pardon my pronunciation, Mono no Orare and Gender as Affect in Japanese Aesthetics, American Pragmatism, was published by Lexington Books in 2023. And now, Johnathan.
Hi, thank you, both Takaharu and Jason, for having me. I'm really happy to be here and happy that this organization exists, especially given the intersection of my interests. So the talk that I'm going to deliver today is or seats firmly at the intersection of American pragmatism and Japanese philosophy, specifically by looking at the ways in which we can understand Japanese kata through American pragmatism, or through the American pragmatism of John Dewey, specifically his understanding of culture and habit. And so my talk for today is called Culture as Do and Habit as Kata. And so I will begin first by talking through John Dewey's theory of culture and habit, and then I will proceed to talk a little bit about Japanese Do, and then I will, at the end of the talk, indicate the ways in which these two systems can come together, or these two systems come together to enable us to have a sort of more robust understanding of both Do as cultural practices and specific ways of being in the world. So, in the broadest sense, culture is the term that Dewey uses to refer to the variety of ways that humans engage in transactions with their environments to satisfy their needs. In doing so, the human organism transforms a physical environment into a cultural environment, which is what Dewey refers to as an environment of meaning and consequence, through how the physical environment supplies the means whereby humans maintain their characteristic patterns of activities. And so for Dewey, the traditions, institutions, customs, and purposes of culture enable this transformation such that the physical environment becomes part of an inclusive situation through which the human organism comes to be. Now, if we were to put this differently for Dewey, the cultural environment grows out of the physical environment, but is not identical with the physical environment, just as the human organism is continuous with, but not identical to its social and cultural environment. And so given this emphasis on organism environment transaction, it's first necessary to understand what Dewey means by environment. And so first of all, Dewey says that the words environment and medium denote something more than the surroundings which encompass an individual. They denote the specific continuity of the surroundings with that individual's own active tendencies. And so in this context, continuity is crucial to Dewey's understanding of environment, as an organism can only said to be or can only be said to belong to an environment when that environment supplies the means to satisfy its needs. And so an environment is therefore more than the physical space that an organism occupies. It's the ways that the environment enables the growth process of an organism through transaction with the environment, such that the organism can be said to be part of the environment or extended through the environment. And insofar as this is the case, the kind of physical environments that humans occupy will shape the kinds of transactions supplied to an individual through their culture. And so we should understand that for Dewey, every transaction is the result of an organism seeking to satisfy a need or a lack in a present-like situation. And through reaching out to the environment, the organism acquires the means to resolve this lack either through its own actions or through mere chance, and returns to a state of equilibrium. And so, however, it's not the case that this new equilibrium is the same as the one occupied previously. The organism is changed because of the struggle and the processes of inquiry it engages in to resolve its sort of disequilibrium. And insofar as this process of inquiry, this reaching out to the environment, incorporates some element of the environment into itself, the ways that an organism reaches out to an environment will be structured by the physical environment in which it takes place. And this is important as we this is important as we begin to think about culture, right? And so for Dewey, in the context of humans, it is the case that different environments result in the development of different cultures, and different cultures result in different customs, which themselves are the collective body of ways that humans reach out to their environment to satisfy a given need. Insofar as this is the case, a cultural environment supplies the specific means whereby the human organism satisfies its needs. In this context, the environment, or the cultural environment, also supplies a specific pattern of behavior which enable the transformation of an environment into a culture through the ways that they direct the transactions of the human organism with the environment. And so a basic example of this is described in the ways that that Dewey explains the development of cultures, technologies, and occupations as adaptations to an environment. And so in A Common Faith, Dewey defines adaptation as a process whereby environing conditions are modified so that they are aligned with the wants, needs, and purposes of the human organism. As an example, in nature, the building of a bird's nest or a beaver's dam, both of which modify environing conditions such that the bird or the beaver can be provided with shelter for itself or its young from the attacks of predators, right? And similarly, people who live by, say, tending sheep have adapted themselves to differing environments through modifying the conditions in which they live. Sheep herders modify the environment through modifying the activities of sheep such that they are confined within pastures through the emplacement of fencing and other material to prevent their departure. In Dewey's example of, say, horse-mounted people, they modify their environment through modifying the activities of horses such that they become trained mounts suited to a variety of human activities. So in this context, horses and sheep are as much part of the environment to be adapted by the human organism through a collection of transactions that we refer to as sheep herding or horse breaking, with the aim of modifying the behavior of animals such that human needs can be satisfied. And insofar as this is the case, the collection of transactions that include things like sheep herding and horse breaking comprise the customs of a given culture, and they result in the development of unique ways of life. And so for Dewey, life covers customs, institutions, beliefs, victories, defeats, recreations, and occupations, which is to say that in a culture that relies upon horsemanship as an adaptation to its environment, specific kinds of occupations and institutions may develop which direct the human organism in unique ways, right? Insofar as this is the case, a horse-based culture might develop technologies and tools that aid in the breaking and training of horses for the purposes of pulling plows, waging war, and transporting goods. The occupation of the mounted warrior or horse breeder might be placed in high esteem and carry great cultural weight. The horse might take on a religious or spiritual meaning, resulting in the development of political and legal codes that determine the treatment of horses. Even in the language used, the horse might feature prominently. So, for example, a surname like horsemaster or horsebreaker might indicate nobility, whereas a surname like barnsman might indicate a more common birth. Now, in contrast, a culture that is primarily like pastoral, reliant upon sheep and cattle herding for its survival, might develop different kinds of customs and rituals surrounding the treatment of cattle or sheep. They may treat the surname shepherd as a sign of nobility and use the word ram to indicate fierceness of personality. Their culture may adopt a more sedentary, slow pace in comparison to others, as it would be grounded in the transactions between the cattle and the shepherds themselves. But to be clear, all of these cultural results and their infinite variety emerge because of the adaptation of the environment through transaction between the human organism and the environment itself. And insofar as this is the case, for Dewey, culture itself consists of two interdependent elements, material and ideal. So the material elements of culture are comprised of artifacts which include habitations, temples and their rituals, weapons, paraphernalia, tools, implements, methods of transportation, roads, clothing, decorations, ornamentations, and it will also include the ways that these artifacts are used, the practices that structure their use, and the technical processes of their production. So further, the material elements of culture, insofar as Dewey takes culture itself to be a mode of language, will communicate something about the environmental and social context of that culture. Insofar as instruction in using artifacts enables the transmission of culture by situating an artifact within the context of how one should use it, instruction in using the material elements of culture also enables the transmission of culture through education. And so, for example, the meaning of a temple for Dewey would be found in the various kinds of rituals performed within it. And similarly, the kinds of practices that are performed in homes, in businesses, within schools, all of which supply meaning to an artifact, are also part of the material aspects of culture. And temples here are an excellent example of Dewey's points, right? The organization of a Christian church, a Jewish synagogue, and an Islamic mosque are all predictive of the activities that take place within them. Their unique architectural styles and religious iconography communicate to members of a culture that these buildings are to be used in line with the rituals or the customs of the religious faith that have established them. Further, it need not be the case that these spaces be used for their purposes, right? A Shinto shrine transformed into a museum still communicates the purposes for which it was constructed, despite the rituals not continuing to take place within them. The Parthenon, for example, communicates its purpose despite no longer being a major site of religious worship. Now, in contrast, the ideal elements of culture comprise the moral, scientific, aesthetic, and political belief structures, which subsequently determine the use of the material elements of culture. We may also include religious belief structures and the ideal elements of culture, specifically insofar as they encompass the ritual practices to be performed inside of temples as part of their function. Indeed, how religious belief structures transact with the material elements of culture serve to form the ground of the varieties of fashion that may express one's cultural membership through the determination of how to display or use religious iconography, or the ideal elements of culture may also determine the appropriate kinds of conduct to be performed in specific locations within a cultural environment. Some rituals, for example, may need to be carried out in temples or shrines built specifically for that purpose, thereby resulting in the ideal elements of culture determining how the material elements, including the rituals that Dewey indicates, can be used and used for what purpose. Still further, the ideal elements of culture also determine the appropriate use and organization of the human body. Right, as the ideal elements of culture also include moral and political structures, they determine the appropriate disposition of the human body in association with other individuals within a cultural environment. And so the ideal elements of culture, for example, may restrict how individuals might use their sexual organs or make visible parts of their bodies or engage in specific kinds of collective association. And in as much as these ideal elements are in transaction with the material elements, ideal elements may also determine the appropriate clothing to wear to signal some kinds of social consequences and not others. And so the ideal elements of culture thereby consist in the knowledge of how to deploy and organize the material, not simply of culture, but of the human body, such that the characteristic activities of a given culture are preserved in their enduring form. Right. And so further, for Dewey, it is the environment that is organized through the interrelation of the material and the ideal elements that serves to engage the human organism in transactions that, for Dewey, form the mental and emotional disposition of behavior in individuals by engaging them in activities that arouse and strengthen certain impulses or that have certain purposes and entail certain consequences. And as these transactions are in continuity with a cultural environment and incorporate elements of that environment into themselves, the kinds of individuals which emerge through these transactions with the social environment come to bear the stamp of the cultural environments that enabled their formation. And so if we put it another way, just as the kinds of architecture that a culture produces are indicative of the kinds of physical surroundings the culture occupies, so too are the kinds of people that a culture produces, so too are the kinds of people that a culture produces indicative of their cultural environment, right? To this end, persons are the result of the transformation of the human organism into individuals through their continuity with the cultural environment. So the modes of transacting with the environment, including other organisms with the environment, organize humans into persons through the ways that they direct particular kinds of instinctual activities, once formed under the pressures of biological necessity, into activities predictive of social consequences, right? And for Dewey, this is how culture engages in the modification of the human organism such that it comes to be recognized as a person. And modification here is not so much a change in the physical organization as it is the attribution of meaning to the activities of the human organism in transaction with the environment. And so insofar as this is the case, what Dewey argues here is that those things that mark human organisms as individuals or as part of a extended culture are not native to the human organism itself, but the result of culture transforming the human organism into a member of a culture or a society. And to demonstrate this point, Dewey offers the example of what he calls the pecuniary nature of American culture, right? Insofar as this is the case, he says American greed is the result of the stimulation of specific desires and purposes by means of a cultural environment. And this pattern of desires and purposes for Dewey is the core of what we might call the American way or the American cultural identity. And so for Dewey, if members of American culture demonstrate a tendency towards like the acquisition of profit, it is not the case that this is innate to human nature. Rather, this is the result of the influence of the cultural environment upon the raw materials of human nature, such that the native tendencies of the human organism are reorganized into an individual that seeks out profit as their end. The human organism is thus transformed into a person, and a person into a member of society through how the raw materials of the human organisms are shaped and organized by the customs of their culture, right? And thus, for Dewey, any cultural identity, any cultural way emerges from the ways in which the elements of a culture interact with one another, and the ways in which the elements of human nature are caused to interact with one another under set conditions or under conditions set by their interactions with the existing environment, which gives rise to specific kinds of persons through their transactions with a physical and cultural environment. Now, for Dewey, these patterns of behavior are what he calls customs at a cultural level and habit at the individual level, right? Here we will focus specifically on habit as the building blocks of customs, right? Insofar as the resulting persons, persons which take up the customs of their given culture bear the stamp of their culture through the ways that they transact with their environment, individuals become recognized as members of a culture through the ways that they are identified through the incorporation of habits into their day-to-day conduct. Thus, for Dewey, habit has a particular meaning. So for Dewey, habit not only refers to the specific actions taken in and upon the world, but also includes the ways that habit is organized and reorganized in response to consequences of their actions, right? And insofar as one understands the consequences of actions, their meaning upon, or the meaning of these actions upon the execution of habit, this is integrated into future execution of a given habit, such that the habit grows through experience and is reorganized in transaction with the environment. And so for Dewey, habits are not simply executed against or upon an environment. Habits are a mode of transaction with the environment. And specifically, it is a mode of transaction that will seek to organize the conditions favorable to its existence. As for Dewey, any habit marks an active preference and choice for the conditions involved in its exercise, which is to say that any exercise of habit requires an understanding of the conditions necessary to enable the successful exercise of habit. And this, for Dewey, is the way in which habits allow us to know the world through understanding the raw materials to which a habit is applied, right? And so insofar as this is the case, we can take the example of the way in which skilled professionals know the world through the habits cultivated by their professions, and not say through a theory of mind or cognition as conventionally understood. And so, for example, for Dewey, a carpenter would understand the world in terms of the habits of carpentry, either by analogy or through direct application, as does a painter, a teacher, a judge, or a police officer. And this mode of knowing the world is reflected in the conduct of the individual through the habits of their profession, right? Cultural habits, insofar as this is easy to see in terms of the narrow example of professional habits, cultural habits also function in the same way. Members of the culture know the world through the habits supplied by that culture, and how other persons, objects, spaces, and organisms appear in the world is through the habits cultivated by culture. And so as a result, the meaning of different environments varies across cultures, even if these cultures occupy the same space, as it is through our cultural habits that we have a world. And insofar as this is the case, right, the cultural habits are the ways in which individuals are attuned to their cultural environment, right? So the processes of socialization and enculturation are the processes of instilling or cultivating into the member of a culture the appropriate habits, which are then integrated together into conduct that attunes an individual with the broader cultural world around them. Habituation in this way establishes continuity with the environments through the integration of the habits of the self. And insofar as these habits are embodied in the form of custom supplied by the cultural environment, this continuity is established by means of a environment and incorporates into the individual the elements of their cultural environment, thereby attuning them to culture, right? And so, and the to this end, how an individual has a world is defined through habits as disposition towards action in the world, and habit is what enables an individual to make actual the possibilities imminent in a given situation, right? It is also, again, that which enables knowledge of the world. And so, for example, as a martial artist, I know the world by means of the habits cultivated into me through martial arts practice. These habits organize my body, dispose it to modes of action in and through my environment, and serve to structure how I understand the objects or the properties of objects within it. Objects in the world may become weapons for me in addition to their other properties through the ways in which I've learned to deploy my body against them. However, how objects become weapons is limited by the kinds of martial arts that I practice. So, for example, a stick becomes a sword through the habits of swordsmanship that organize my body. A mop becomes a spear, and a spoon, well, a spoon is a spoon. This example has a more specific bearing insofar as in the past, the martial arts were more than a leisure activity, they were an occupation, right? And an occupation is a pursuit that enables an individual to discover their capacities by means of an environment that develops these capacities through transaction. And this is important because occupations are a means of self-discovery. And for Dewey, habits constitute the self, right? Habits constitute self through the ways in which they enable the coordination of our biological structures to accomplish an end. And insofar as this is the case, it is through the coordination of habit that any self possessing an identity is disclosed, right? This is valuable insofar as for Dewey, the body becomes a means to accomplish an aim only when organized in conjunction with external materials to secure a result. The body is only potentially a means until to an end until taken up and organized through habit. And so selfhood and identity only emerge through transaction as structured by disposition towards action as organized by culture, right? And it is for this reason that Dewey states that our understanding of what is individual or personal or of our cultural identity emerges from the contribution of cultural customs that enable our self or our character to emerge as a quality of behaving. And so for Dewey, a man may give himself away in a look or a gesture, and character can be read through the medium of individual acts only if these acts are integrated together. And thus, to this end, it's the integration of habits which give an individual their sense of individuality. It is the integration of these cultural habits together in the mode of custom, which gives individual cultures their sense of what they are. And insofar as this is the case, the habits that make up an individual as derived from custom are not neutral, and they bear the mark of their environments. For Dewey, every habit incorporates within itself some part of the objective environment, which is to say, it incorporates some element of the culture which supplied it. This then gets us to the nature of dole, right? So a dole or a michi is the Japanese articulation of the Chinese concept of Tao or way or a path. And so in this context, way includes method and doctrine, but is not necessarily restricted to it. In structure, dole have been treated in philosophical literature as parallel to the classical Greek concept of ethos, wherein an ethos is more than a collection of skills, which is a techne, but an organized interaction with the social and cultural environment in which the individual participates. And so a dole is strongly ethical, and as part of following a do, the truths revealed through the practice of a do elevate and perfect the individual human personality, which is to say that a crucial element in any do was the perfection of the individual through adherence to a structured mode of praxis, which itself was connected to a larger historical context. Indeed, many dole draw the authority of their praxis from a historical lineage that stretches back into antiquity. And so, so far as this is the case, Konishi Junichi argues that what is characteristic of Michio Dole is the strongly restrictive view that transmission from an earlier age must communicate a conformist ethic to future generations, so that a transmission can be received exactly as it was handed down. Insofar as Konishi presents this as part of the ie, or house system of codification of Michi or Do in Japanese ancient past, what we should take from this is that every Do requires a history as interpreted that enables the practice of the Do to be immediately authoritative within its social context. Each Do, therefore, has a narrative that connects it to a tradition beyond itself, which is embodied in the practice of the Do in society and serves to organize it as distinct from other Do. And so there is an additional element to Do that we should pay attention to, the provision of kata, or form. Now, in use, kata is the term kata here is not taken to mean structure or shape, but rather pattern, as the latter, structure or shape, is typically typically referred to in Japanese as katachi, which contains a kanji for kata, but is not identical to the kanji that we're using here. And so, at their most basic, kata are codified bodily movements that aim to cultivate into practitioners the capacity to deploy the skills of the Do as an automatic response in a specific situation. And insofar as this is the case, kata practice serves as the ground for all Japanese traditional art forms, where the emphasis is on the mastery of basic bodily postures and not individual expression. And insofar as kata emphasizes basic forms, they serve to organize the body such that the essence of a Do is made manifest in all of the practitioners' transactions with the world. So kata, in this mode, kata are functionally similar to Dewey's habit. And as habit, they serve to inculcate a particular stylization of activity in line with the ethos of a given Do, which includes the social conduct required of the practitioner. So as a example, many martial arts kata begin and end with ritual bowing to indicate respect for partners, particularly when the kata in question are paired practices. And this activity habituates or instructs the practitioner instructs the practitioner in line with an ethos that demands respect for the life of an opponent, even in the context of a conflict, such that the deployment of any given martial art is in line with the ethical standards of that art. And so, through the disciplining of the body in line with ethical standards, it is assumed that even in combat, the individual will have cultivated a disposition where the ethos of the Do will guide the techniques supplied, thereby enabling appropriate conduct within each situation. Now, while this is specific to martial arts in a general sense, a less specialized version of kata is found in everyday practices, right? And so this mode of kata refers to standardized ways of executing a task, often referred to as shikata, or a method of action, right? So among shikata as a general class are kakikata, ways of writing, yomikata, ways of reading, kangae kata, ways of thinking or understanding, miru kata, iki kata, and so on, all of which refer to sort of standardized practices that organize the individual in the action to which the suffix kata is applied. Kaki kata, for example, includes the proper stroke order for kanji in Japanese or letters in English. And as regimented into the stroke order of kanji, kaki kata serve to habituate the writer into producing kanji that have a regular experience, or a regular kind of appearance, right? And so kata, as indicated by their name, when joined together, provide the unique essence of all of the various Japanese do. They serve to stylize not only the habits of the body, but they serve to not only habits of the body towards an end in view, but they also serve to cultivate the sensitivity of the practitioner through the denial of the personal. And any individualization of the kata prior to mastery of the form is not true mastery of the art in the eyes of a master. And so to truly individualize the practice, the kata must be internalized and allowed to become part of the practitioner's bodily stylization, which is to say that individuality emerges through appropriating the objects of the action, or through the objects of the action as its action, right? To this end, things we need to bear in mind is that kata, as articulated in Japanese do, also serve to cultivate the self. And in this context, it is through the internalization of kata practice that the individuality of the embodiment of the do in question emerges, right? Insofar as an individual learns the truth of the do through praxis, wherein the truth of the do is its manifestation in every action, the practitioner forgets their self, as what constitutes the self is made present through the do as the individualization of its practice. And so it is the practice of kata that allows the self cultivated through do to come forth by means of the habits organized by kata. And in doing so, kata praxis is not simply the means whereby a do, as organized by the history as interpreted of a given art, is made present through embodiment. It is the means whereby the whole of the do is made present as part of the self, disclosed through the habits of the practitioner. And so when karateka say life is karate, for example, we might read this in the sense intended by Dewey. Karate do encompasses the whole of the institutions, customs, habits, the very way of being in the world of the karateka. And so there's one final element to understand for Dewey. It's that about do, particularly in a Deweyan sense, it's that do the gap between the artistic and the aesthetic, right? So for Dewey, term art approaches or is similar in use to Greek techne, and which intends a collection of skills, and aesthetic refers to how the results of the art are enjoyed, right? And enjoy here is not strictly restricted to the positive. One can enjoy a negative experience as well, right? So in a given Japanese martial art or a given Japanese way, the practice of doing or making result in the working of the body in line with the do of a given style. And this combined sense of kata as both artistic and aesthetic is present in imbu, which refers to the demonstration of martial arts techniques before an audience, but also has the meaning of training in the martial arts, right? And so insofar as this is the case, we should take note that it is not simply the martial arts that involve kata, but also aesthetic practices like shodo, kado, and different forms of Japanese dance that also rely on the kata-like structure to enable the integration of both the aesthetic and artistic. So thus, any understanding of a do absent recognition that each do is also a combined aesthetic and artistic practice that results in a unique stylization of the body through kata is an incomplete understanding of do. So any way of being in the world, being called a do, has its own affective or aesthetic quality that emerges from the integration of kata into do. And so insofar as this is the case, we can turn back to Dewey to bring these two elements together, right? So in Dewey's understanding of culture, the institution which supply the wide body of habits intended to align individuals with their cultural environment include everything from political institutions to aesthetic works to laws, tools, and even scientific principles. On this view, institutions are means of producing individuals in line with the cultural narratives that they embody. And so the connection between Japanese do and Dewey's institutions should become clear. Insofar as the authoritative status of a do is derived from its appeal to historical lineage, all do rely on an authoritative narrative to organize the production of individuals through the self-cultivation of a praxis of kata, which stylizes the body through action, such that the self that emerges does so under the controlling influence of a do. It bears the stamp of that way of being in the world. And insofar as an institution is a means of creating and cultivating individuals, do themselves are institutional structures that enable the shaping of purpose of persons. And so this allows us to understand how in Japanese philosophy and culture, a variety of activities become do through their organization, right? If the habits of a culture bear the stamp of that culture and the practices of culture also serve to cultivate a sensitivity through elements of the world, then the various ways that come together to or to form the given way of a culture supply kata that align individuals with that culture. And to this end, kata is not simply a methodology for cultivating a given aesthetic form. It is also a methodology for understanding how we become parts of a social and cultural environment. And so in the context of Japanese culture, Tom Kasulis offers several examples of how this works, specifically the kata of bowing, wherein Japanese individuals are trained to execute certain kata for social interaction, specifically in response to verbal cues, right? As an example of this culturally conditioned kata, Kasulis states, quote, certain Japanese phrases are always accompanied by the appropriate bowing kata, so much so that the Japanese use them even when talking on the telephone, end quote. And so what Kasulis is describing is commonly referred to as dinwa kata, or telephone forms, which prescribe specific modes of speech conduct in response to the cultural and social status of the speakers engaged in a telephone conversation. More crucially, dinwa kata is a specific form of hanashi kata, or appropriate modes of speech practiced more generally within Japanese culture. And so within dinwa kata and hanashi kata, specific forms of address are required depending on the social power differential between individuals. Failure to properly execute the appropriate mode of address across power differentials demonstrates a failure to internalize the specific kata and a failure to be appropriately sensitive to the context of a conversation. And this failure discloses something about the inner nature of the individual. And to this end, hanashi kata and dinwa kata are codified methods that cultivate into the individual specific ways of being in the world through Japanese culture. Put another way, dinwa kata and hanashi kata are only indicative of a Japanese way, insofar as a Japanese way is a collection of habits which inculcates bodily postures through habit as kata, such that there are specific bodily responses to social environmental conditions, right? And further, it is not simply the case that kata as habit structures specific to cultural habits. Occupations have their own specific kata, which results in what Richard Schusterman calls somatic stylization. And so for Schusterman, somatic stylization results in the development of what he calls implicit memory, which is how embodied habits, or the habits of social roles, are deployed without conscious intention. Habits of professions and cultures that serves to organize persons into individuals are themselves somatically sedimented habits or muscle memories, which serve to stylize the body in line with the roles adopted. And so Schusterman's treatment of habit as somatically sedimented or embodied socially provides language to make clear the ways that a person's social roles, which themselves possess their own do, are structured by habit through kata. And so it is the case here on this view that all socially assigned roles have their own kata, and the integration of which makes present a socially assigned role as a do. And so the kata of a do supplies a somatic style unique to a socially assigned role. And so, as Schusterman states, other roles have their characteristic embodiments. A policeman, a judge, a doctor all possess different forms of authority and differently embody them. Success in their roles requires incorporating the right bodily attitudes and comportment. And here we might take Schusterman's bodily attitudes and comportment as extended ways of describing the somatic stylization that emerges from different do. And so in the do of a doctor, for example, requires the inculcation of kata somatic stylizations that enable the doctor to embody their profession through modes of interaction that we might describe as a bedside manner, where while the do of a police officer might require them require the inculcation of a kata that enables them to quickly assess a situation for potential criminality in law with the institutional structure of the law. In both contexts, the kata of professionals also cultivates into them an orientation towards the world or a way of knowing the world such that they can non-reflectively respond in line with the ethos of their do to a given situation. Insofar as this is the case, right, the kata of professions can also demonstrate the rigidity of other kinds of katas as incorporated into the body of somatic style, insofar as we are unable to switch off. Schusterman's example of his father-in-law on the screen here is indicative of such. And so to conclude, if we take seriously the idea that all cultures, all professions, all artistic practices have their own do and thus their own kata, and we understand kata to be the collection of habits that enable specific ways of transacting with the world that denote each do as unique, then it becomes clear that the Japanese philosophical assertion that there is a do for all of our embodied activities cannot be so easily dismissed. Still further, this interpretation of kata as integrated habits supplied by the given do of a profession or a culture or an activity allows us to re-understand how different Japanese do are embodied practices, not simply organized bodies of knowledge. Insofar as this is the case, to claim to follow the way of a practice, be it aikido, judo, karate do, shodo, or any other practice, is not simply the mastery of a collection of techniques. It is the embodiment of those techniques through the somatic stylization of the body in line with cultural habits. And finally, as each do takes up the stamp of the environment from which it emerged, through how the kata that make up that do structure the do, it is the case that each do possesses a unique quality that reflects the cultural environment in which it is anchored. That is, we are going to make sense of an American way of politics, or a Japanese style of business management, or a European model of cultural organization through the framework supplied above. What we're talking about are the ways that the do implicit in these ways or styles of management or styles of management of politics or of cultural organization habituate our bodies in line with the social and cultural expectations of a given cultural environment. So insofar as this is the case, the adjectival description of an American style of politics emerges from the integration of the habits that make up the kata of American politics in how one has a world through American politics. Thus, the claim that each do results in a unique cultural specificity is not pointing to something essential about the culture itself. Rather, it is pointing to the ways in which culture, as possessing a myriad of do, are continuous with the environments from which they emerge, and the ways that the cultural specificity of do are a sense of the continuity of this continuity with the cultural environment. To follow the do of a culture, therefore, is to adopt the habits through kata, which organize the body in line with the environment from which that culture emerged, and insofar as habits reach out to the world to seek the conditions of their execution, it is to see the world through the do of another culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers. Let's start with Q&A sessions. And as usual, if you don't want to be recorded when you talk and speak, I will let you speak after these recording sessions. So feel free to speak whenever you want. And please raise hands if you want a question first. Or some clicking on the button. Any question or comment is welcome. If there is nothing yet, I hope they're speaking. Oh, Jason, you want to see? Yeah, please go ahead. Jason? Okay. Then I will go ahead first if he doesn't speak. So I have just maybe two kinds of questions.
Sure.
First, about the Do or Dao.
Mhm,
I was wondering whether Dewey and Dr. Flowers, you yourself, have something in
mhm,
mind in terms of any specific religious tradition when it comes to the institutional structure of Do or Kata, when you
mhm,
practice some type of patterns or Do,
mhm,
um, did you both have something um, philosophical or religious traditions? Okay.
mhm. In general, I did not have a specific religious tradition in mind, though. If you look at different manuals of instruction in traditional Japanese arts, there's quite a lot of both Zen and Shinto philosophy baked into the instructional methods, right? So I think so a couple of good examples are the All Japan Kyudo Federation's manual. I think the 1971 version explicitly uses a lot of Shinto and Buddhist language to understand different kamae and different postures for drawing the bow, even the purpose of stringing the bow, and um, uh, the ways of focusing as one fires the bow. And there's one example where the manual provides three different levels of instruction. One is essentially mastery of the kata of drawing and shooting, which the manual is clear to say is not true mastery of the form. It is simply inculcation of the kata inculcation of the kata. And true mastery emerges when one's objective moves beyond simply hitting the target, but recognizing the ways in which the practice of Kyudo informs all of one's activities. Same things with Gichin Funakoshi's in Karate Do Kyohan. This is like very much in the introduction. So I did not have a specific religious tradition in mind when thinking about the relationship between kata and habit and culture. But one thing that we might bear in mind is if you've ever been to a Catholic service, those are incredibly regimented religious practices, which in, involve the inculcation of a particular kata of how one engages in religious service, right? And if we look at cathedrals as structures continuous with the cultural environment, insofar as they direct our eyes upwards towards God, they embody a particular dole of Catholicism, even if the Catholics would be less likely to present what's going on in that language. So when I wasn't thinking of this in terms of a specific religious structure, but you can see the structure of kata as connected to do in a variety of organized traditions, organized practices, organized religions.
All right. So likewise, Dewey didn't think about any specific religious structure, right? Yeah.
No, no. Dewey would think of religion as an institution that, through the supplying of specific habits, uh, organizes our capacity for perception and transaction with the world in a particular way. What Dewey says about spirituality and the religious is, I think, finds its purest form in a text called "Religion and the Religious," where he points to how what religions claim to do, which is open us up to, say, the majesty of God, is really a a cultivation of our perception through habit, such that we are aware of the qualitative unities in a variety of situations. Religions simply concentrate that awareness in a given space, thus leading to a sense of the religious, which is a sort of felt quality of the world. What Dewey goes on to say is that that organized religions do not have a sort of exclusive right to this sense, this felt sense of being part of the world, and one can encounter it in a variety of activities, insofar as the inculcation of habit enables us to transact with the world in particular ways. And so this gets us all the way back to kata, right? So the if we think about the role of torii gates and shimenawa in Shinto, which is to identify or denote areas where we might encounter kami, or denote something as kami, right? What in a if we're going to say take someone like Motori Norinaga, what we are encountering there is the aware, the felt moving power of a given space, which is what is denoted by the shimenawa or the torii gate. And in encountering that moving power, we are led to engage in habits, activities that refine our perception, such that we can engage with it throughout the world.
Oh, all right. Yeah, very clear to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in relation to that question, if you don't mind, I have one more question for you. More philosophical one.
Sure.
Yeah, because as you pointed out, the Shinto example of Shimenawa, right?
Mm.
Because that indicates some sanctuary within the
Mm.
space.
Mm.
Yeah, as some kind of pattern, let's say, or
Mm.
though
Mm-hmm.
by means of some practice.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, that kind of practiced pattern is something beyond one's or an individual practitioner's conception, or
Mm-hmm.
beyond one's thinking scope.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about whether it's anti-realism or just realist tradition, like
Mm-hmm.
Charles Peirce's way of
Mm-hmm.
realism, because Dewey didn't agree with Peirce's uh,
Yeah.
realist attitude to some habitual practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, because I was reading, or maybe you know this book. Sorry, it's a um, well, it's a conceptual lexicon by um, uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Roger
uh,
Ames's book.
yeah, Roger Ames. So Roger Ames has a very big, useful categorization from the Chinese Confucianism, and
Mm-hmm.
though, uh, on my view, is somehow closely related to Japanese Confucianism at the time, because
Mm-hmm.
Aikido and Judo
Mm-hmm.
and many Do system, um,
Mm-hmm.
those uh, systematic views came from the moral perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That morality came from directly from Confucianism rather
Mm-hmm.
than Taoism or
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe from the pre-modern time of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, because the Confucian definition of Dao or Do
Mm-hmm.
is also complicated. So I don't want to uh,
Yeah.
torture you.
Yeah.
I don't mean to bother, but I want
Mm-hmm.
to clarify whether the any uh, definition of anti-realism or realism in your way,
Mm-hmm.
because do you take just a Deweyan anti-realist way, or some kind of realist view in terms of Do or Dao?
Um, so okay, I might say that insofar as Dewey is not a big fan of the realism anti-realism divide here, right? I would say that what uh, and yes, you're very correct to point out the Confucian heritage of Japanese understandings of Do, which is something that I didn't quite get to in my talk, particularly because the sort of regimented structure of Japanese Do is very, very Confucian in its structure, and like brings with it things like principle, right? So every like Japanese Do begins with kihon, basics, right? And these kihons are the most basic expressions of the principle that around which a Do is organized. Yamaga Soko and Kaibar Eken and that crew have done or do a lot to articulate that. Kaibar Eken is actually particularly good here in his work on instructions to women, for example, on how to use on the articulation of a Do of womanhood that includes particular kata, which were specifically aimed at restraining what he viewed as women's sort of like bad behaviors. That there's a particular sort of thing going on there. But one of the things I would say from a Deweyan perspective, which does not take up like the realism, anti-realism distinction, one of the things that I would say that Do do is point to what Dewey calls the generic traits of existence or generic traits of experience. And these generic traits are just generic qualities of ways of being in the world that we discern through processes of inquiry, and they are what allow us to understand, say, something about the world through our inculcated habits, or something about a different field through our inculcated habits, through the ways in which they reveal generic traits of existence, right? So what Dole do is allow us in this context to recognize generic traits of existence that might be shared among different Dole, which we might call sort of universal truths revealed by like Dole practice, right? So there's the idea that if you attain, say, complete, actually, in the Cotton show, right? The records of no performance. There's the argument that if you attain complete mastery of no drama, you can also understand the underlying elements of other traditional arts. And similarly, in Takawan Soho's treatise to Yagimune Nore, there's a piece where Soho says, well, you know, in Buddhism we call this thing, or the mind that stops, a mind that is caught by delusions. In your own martial art, you would refer to this as the ways that a beginner gets stuck on the sword that is coming at them. These two things are not different. And so what I take from that is kata practice inculcates us into an awareness of how the generic traits of existence are found in distinct combinations within different ways of being in the world. And in recognizing this, we can recognize their particularities within given situations and the different places in which we can say apply them, right? So that's a sort of roundabout way of answering your question, but it's difficult to like stake out a realist, anti-realist position from within this Deweyan perspective, given the ways in which Dewey was firmly against that sort of a distinction.
But that doesn't mean Dewey is taking naturalism in your.
Yeah, no, it's not a even that like experience in nature has some elements toward in the or in the appendices in the later works where Dewey writes out his struggle with the terms naturalism and instrumentalism, and while he accepted the idea that his ideas of culture and habit were naturalistic in some sense, in that they indicated a continuity between the human individual and the natural environment. We're in nature through culture and so on and so forth. He thought a treatment as an ism would unfairly restrict the scope of what he had in mind.
Oh, very helpful answer. Yeah, I learned a lot because I tend to distinguish those kinds of isms, but that's misleading. Yeah, for Dewey. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another question.
Yes.
Yeah, Jason, please.
Okay, sure. So first of all, a comment for Johnathan. We appreciate his, welcome his response, and then a question. So a comment where you were talking about integration of habits. So I'm not a Dewey specialist. I'm a Peirce specialist, particularly person semiotics. But of course, I'm increasingly interested in Dewey's philosophy of experience. So what I was particularly struck by is when you said talking about, if I recall correctly, you said that Dewey said we can, in fact, know something about somebody's character by a gesture or look or word, but that presupposes an integration of habits.
Yes.
I think that's a very important point to bring up for indexical signification in Peircean semiotics, that indexicality is always going to work depending on some integration of forms, of habits, and particularly knowledge of human character. So, I mean, you can respond to that, but I think that was a very important point I took from it, from your talk for semiotics.
Yes, and so Dewey says this in Human Nature and Conduct, right? So character is disclosed through the medium of habit, and insofar as this is the case, character can only be disclosed through the medium of habit, such that the habits in question are integrated together into a developmental continuity and not treated as discrete sequential actions, right? And insofar as that is the case, what Dewey is pointing to is the ways that all of the habits that make up who we are and how we transact with the world are in integration and not a seriality, such that when we observe an individual's actions, say a person that we know fairly well, right, we can make some estimation of what they're going to do next. And so if somebody so if you were to be told that Takaharu had committed murder somewhere, you would say that is out of character for Takaharu. I don't know why they would do that. And the reason why you can say that is because the integration of habits that enables you to make an assessment of Takaharu's character does not include a propensity, a disposition for committing murder. Now, that integration of habits also functions within what Dewey calls a universe of discourse, right? And so, in order to begin to talk about the character as being disclosed through an integration of habits, you have to exist in a universe of discourse that supplies a language to talk about the given the integration of habits as a particular trait of character. Impulsiveness, coquettishness, kindness, things like this. These are all qualities that emerge as a result of the integration of habits together, such that we can describe a person using sort of like adjectival forms, right? For insofar as I'm not a Peircean, I think the value for Peircean semiotics would be to understand that a sign can be understood only within its broader universe of discourse, and the ways in which we learn to understand things emerge from the integration of habits. But then again, Dewey has a different way of thinking about signs and symbols than Peirce. Does that help with your?
It does, and actually, if you're bringing that up, then actually maybe we could have that as another webinar discussion sometime, comparing Peirce and Dewey on symbols and signification, universal discourse. So, although I say I'm a specialist in Peirce, I'm not by any means a master or expert in Peirce. I'm still getting the Kata. I don't have the Do of Peirce.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No, I mean with Dewey, Peirce believes that the self is a continuous habit, continuous with the environment. In particular, way of talking about is that the self is a sign. but just in particular, I was thinking was about this idea of integration of habits, because when I teach about Persian semiotics, I see now that my failure as a teacher is I tend to focus on just the seriality, okay, which you can get actually from Sherlock Holmes detective stories, which are good introduction to indexical inference, but they tend to be too much just on the discreteness. And like you're talking about, character. So yes, Takaharu certainly is not a murderer or mafia, anything like that. He's a Barclay Scholar. um, yeah, but why is it that we say this isn't consistent with somebody's character? So
Yeah.
that's what we bring up. Well, I just want to bring out to my question. The implications of your presentation for Americans, because there's a tendency in America to see form and individuality as contraries. That to be yourself, you must break away from established forms. Whereas what you're talking about is form as a gateway to individuality, but there's also implied there a critique of just being stuck on a simplistic view of the understanding of mastery of form. So I like the relevance of Kata and Do for Americans, I guess, with Dewey as a translator.
Sure. And so one of the easiest ways to think about this might be like when we teach students to write essays, as they come into sort of university from high school, they have a very sort of structured way of writing essays, beginning, middle, end. A paragraph has to have an introduction, has to have a hook, and has to do certain things, and they struggle with breaking out of that. Right? That would be kata as form, which is one of the ways you can read either the kanji for kata, but it's closer to the second kanji for kata, which refers to the form of a thing, usually found in things like sugata. What I'm talking about is kata as pattern, a pattern of activity, and sure, part of that pattern involves a form, right? And so one of the implications here is that in order to be individual or to individualize a given pattern, in some extended work, I point to the ways in which these patterns of activity are themselves styles, right? There are particular styles in a piece on Aikido as art for an online for a Palgrave online work. I point out that the distinctions between styles of martial arts comes down to the ways in which the techniques as kata are patterned, right? So Aikido focuses on a sort of more gentle redirection of energy versus Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, which is a more harsh redirection of energy. But to get back to your point, one of the things that needs to become clear is that any individuated style is a result of our taking up of a given pattern of action and re-articulated it within the context of our given sphere, right? And so we can talk about this in terms of, say, a Heideggerian style of writing, or a Persian style, or Persian semiotics is a style of doing semiotics, and that style is taken up through mastery of the sort of patterns of inquiry, the habits of intellectual engagement laid out by Peirce in his text. And insofar as you inculcate those, you can take them up and deploy them in ways that are unique to them. Even styles of dress within different cultures can be treated as the organization and internalization of specific cultural patterns, such that they are expressed uniquely as properties of an individual. And so what I would say is that Americans have it backwards, right? We tend to think of individualism and formal structures as diametrically opposed, but there is no individual that is not the result of the taking up of formal structures or the taking up and rearticulation of formal structures in ways that align with that given individual's like end and views, right? A person's personal style is developed over a history of their, say, experimenting with different modes of dress, walking, talking, what have you, until they integrate together into something characteristic of them. So individualism emerges from mastery of particular kinds of set forms, right? And yeah.
Great. Really good.
Right. Okay, let's move on to another question. Koki?
Oh, hello. I'm Oki from University of Tokyo. Thank you for very insightful lecture. I enjoyed it so much. So I would like to ask you about like the transformational aspect of kata or habit, because like kata, I think like you emphasize on like kata as some kind of restriction that enabled us to express, but kata is also something that can transform, right? So the important concept, maybe I can mention here, is shuhari, which is shuhari, if translated literally, like it's protection, detachment, and maybe separation. And so, which means that it is only after you embody the kata that you can start transforming. So like you can't, transform kanji, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's when, if, like when it comes to, martial arts, there are many schools of martial arts, and, people, develop certain patterns, create new patterns after they become master. And I think these are, the transformations, we can probably draw some parallel between pragmatism, because, pragmatism has always focused on the development of habit. For example, since I study Peirce, like Peirce always said that habit is something that is governed by teleological cause. Habit is always, something that is headed toward teleology. But in addition to that, Peirce always emphasized the reality of contingent cause, which enables habit to change. And so I would like to ask you about, how you frame these transformation of habit kata.
That's actually a really good question. So there are two kinds of ways that I can answer that. One, habit and kata actually like habit and kata transform the body insofar as they supply new modes of disposing oneself towards the world, and this is true of a variety of different structures, right? Teaching somebody the kata of philosophy can open up to them new ways of thinking about the world, which contemporary neuroscience has indicated results in radical transformations in our neurological architecture, such that we literally rewire, if you want to use that as an analogy, the brain in the process of learning, right? And so that is the one that is like the first level, the biophysical level. Our bodies are transformed when we acquire a new set of habits, typically through kata. And one of a pretty good example is learning to drive a manual transmission, right? As you learn to drive a manual transmission, you learn it in a series of steps, which gradually are incorporated into your body such that you can deploy them as habit in a variety of situations. And when you encounter other manual transmissions or vehicles with manual transmissions, be it with a shift lever up by the dash or on the floor, or even on a motorcycle with the clutch lever on the right-hand side, you have the implicit memory of how to deploy those habits, right? And so that is another way in which your body is transformed. But the third way is one that you're talking about, and one of the things that it's something that I did not have the chance to include, because habit themselves grow and transform as they are deployed in an environment, right? So insofar as we transact with the world through our habits, the results of those transactions are taken up and incorporated into future deployments of habits such that the habit grows. This is why in the martial arts, kumite and sparring is an essential part of all training. Even though Funakoshi says that the best way to learn karate do is through through kata itself, but it is that self-transformational like nature of habit that happens through experience, which actually connects almost directly to Shuhari. And there's a quotation that I left out of this that I'd like to read that I actually sort of works with this, right? So this is from Endo Seishiro, Shihan in Aikido, and he says, it is known that when we learn or train in something, we pass through the stages of Shu, Ha, and Ri. These stages are explained as follow. In Shu, we repeat the forms and discipline ourselves so that our bodies absorb the forms that our forebears created. We remain faithful to the forms with no deviation. Next, in the stage of Ha, once we have disciplined ourselves to acquire the forms and movements, we make innovations. In this process, the forms may be broken and discarded. And finally, in Ri, we completely depart from the forms, open the door to creative technique, and arrive in a place where we act in accordance with what our kokoro desires, unhindered, while not overstepping laws, right? And so in the second stage, the Ha stage, right, after we have practiced kata such that we have internalized the given bodily movements, we depart from the forms, right? And one of the things that my sensei likes to tell me is that when I got my black belt, one of the things that he told me is like, now you need to understand which rules you need to break in what situation in order for technique to be effective, right? So it's not strict adherence to the rules, but understanding the structure of the technique as supplied by kata so that you know what part of the form needs to be adjusted in the situation for proper execution. And this is the transformative part of it, right? And then you get to which would be like Ha, and then you get to Ri, where form is formlessness, and this is common among in No, in Shodo, in Chado. When you depart from the form, you take the form as a given sort of implicit memory, yet you are not limited by the broader codified structure of it, right? While the habits inculcated by kata will still reach out to seek out the favorable conditions for their execution, once you have surpassed form, you recognize that those conditions are wide and various, right? Which gets me to something you said, like you can't really alter the shape of a kanji. No, you can't. Not when you're like writing an essay. But if you're practicing shodo, right? After you have internalized the kakikata of each of the proper stroke order and whatnot, you're supposed to alter the kanji, which is why a lot of shodo is difficult to read, because it's both older representation of the kanji combined with the individualized style of the shodo master, which is why whenever some of my friends present me with like a shodo scroll and say, John, tell me what this means, I'm like, I have no idea. This is a work of art. It's not meant to be read. And that's a transformation of, like you can see the continuity there from the basic kakikata that you learn when you're learning to write kanji to the aesthetic practice of shodo, where you learn to do it with a brush, to the which is a development of the kata, of the kakikata, and then when you have mastered the art, you just start doing it, right? So that's, yeah, shuhari is sort of implicit here.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that kata, it seems like it is some kind of essential character of
Hmm.
kata to have to self-transform because
Hmm.
like probably no probably like no single doll has remained uh remained fixed for like
Yeah,
thousands of
static.
years,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So like it's yeah at first so doll or kata seems something conservative, but if you uh take the long perspective, it
Hmm.
it's interesting how it change continues to change.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for your questions. Is there any one more question? Okay, let's try. This is the final question, Keita.
Thank you for your presentation. And maybe my question can be beyond your presentation, but
Hmm.
I'm so curious about the explanation of kata in
Hmm.
judo, kendo, and so on. So I have, yeah, fortunately, a black belt of judo, and
Hmm.
I tried to examination so of judo kata, judo's kata examination. Yeah. And yeah, anyway, I'd like to ask you about so what types of um, ethical principles so do you assume so when you say kata has ethical principles because in practice in my experience so judo people yeah for example judo people sometimes don't do ethical behavior and
Hmm.
I think sports education can be, of course, a good way to educate students. So following moral behavior or culture. So in Japan, so making a bow is
Hmm.
a good way to show their respectful manner. But
Hmm.
I think in other countries, so it doesn't mean sometimes. So yeah. Anyway, so what do you think about this? So what? Yeah.
Um, so uh the so one of the things about judo kata, right? And I haven't done judo in a very long time. Like one of the things that judo kata are intended to like inculcate into folks are things like kuzushi and timing and like sort of the economy of movement and throws and things like that. And insofar as that is the case, right, the ethics of something like judo kata typically the ethics of judo kata typically vary from instructor to instructor and dojo to dojo, depending on the emphasis that is placed on reihō in a given martial context, right? And so, like, if the focus of the given dojo is less on reihō, or it's just an ornamentation that one does as part of sort of prescriptions in a match or as just the empty tradition, so to speak, then the sort of ethical norms can be lost, and that is something that both Dewey and folks like Funakoshi and actually Jigoro Kano in some of his texts warns against, right? Uh, if you just treat the sort of uh, 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 if you treat Reiho basically as an ornamentation to the martial practice and not something fundamental to it, then you end up with judoka or karateka or kindoka who are, you know, kind of aggressive and tend not to take seriously the ethical prescriptions of the martial arts, right? And in a comparison, something like the kata and aikido are all about figuring out connection, sensitivity, balance, and so as a way, it tends to weed out people who don't take that seriously. And but to answer your question, there is while dole themselves often come with ethical prescriptions as part of their transmission from an earlier lineage, their history as interpreted, the structure of the art itself, how those ethical prescriptions are supplied to practitioners depends greatly on the environment of instruction and the individual instructor, right? Even in even in things like Iaido, right? You can find instructors whose sole focus does not, or whose focus does not include sort of the ethical norms about how one cares for one's sword and how say care for one's sword is reflective of care for the art and so on and so forth. And so one of the things that we should take in mind with Dewey's both continuity and transactional model is that even ways of being in the world are themselves in transaction with an environment. And if you are putting a dole in an environment that does not lend itself to sort of, you know, ethical and moral cultivation, the dole will take up those elements of that environment. It may be more or less resistant to that incorporation, but over time, the dole itself will shift, right? Which is why in America you have a lot of karate dojo, but you have a lot of karate instructors, but you have very few karate sensei, right? Because being a sensei involves a sort of ethical understanding, an understanding of the appropriate conduct of somebody who has learned karate and things like that. And so what I would emphasize there is environment matters in the development of a dole over a long enough period of time, right? Even the most strongly ethical dole can have those norms worn away if it is consistently practiced in an environment that does not, one, reinforce those norms or practice those norms, right? Which is why, you know, as when I teach new students, the first thing that I teach them is Reiho, how to bow, why we bow, why you bow to one another, how and why you bow to the sword, and things like that. Absent that, you just start doing violence, or at least as Funakoshi would say.
Thank you. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yep.
I think it's high time that we should conclude today's session.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Flowers' talk is based on practice of martial arts, not only judo, but you mentioned aikido too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so from the practice, all the more it's convincing from your talk to combine and associate between Deweyan methods or methods of habits with the do and kata in the Japanese context. So let's thank again for Dr. Flowers' knowledgeable and thought-provoking talk today. And see you again next month in the next
Yes.
webinar.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.